spaces of open water, from 10 to 15 miles in breadth, between them. It must, therefore, either go to an open space in the north, or dissolve. I remember that neither my father nor myself had tasted food for almost 30 hours. Perhaps this was because of the tension of excitement about our strange voyage in waters farther north, my father said, than anyone ever before been. Active mentality had dulled the demands of the physical needs. Instead of cold being intense as we had anticipated, it was really warmer and more pleasant than it had been, while in Hammerfest on the north coast of Norway, some 6 weeks before. Captain Peary's second voyage relates another circumstance which may serve to confirm a conjecture which has long been maintained by some, that an open sea, free of ice, exists at or near the pole. On the 2nd of November, says Peary, the wind freshened up to a gale from north by west, lowered the thermometer before midnight to 5 degrees, whereas a rise of wind at Melville Island was generally accompanied by a simultaneous rise in the thermometer at low temperatures. May not this, he asks, be occasioned by the wind blowing over an open sea in the quarter from which the wind blows? And tend to confirm the opinion that at or near the pole an open sea exists? We both frankly admitted that we were very hungry, and forthwith I prepared a substantial meal from our well-stored larder. When we had partaken heartily of the repast, I told my father I believed I would sleep, as I was beginning to feel quite drowsy. Very well, he replied, I will keep the watch. I have no way to determine how long I slept, I only know that I was rudely awakened by a terrible commotion of the sloop. To my surprise, I found my father sleeping soundly. I cried out lustily to him, and starting up, he sprang quickly to his feet. Indeed, had he not instantly clutched the rail, he would certainly have been thrown into the seething waves. A fierce snowstorm was raging. The wind was directly astern, driving our sloop at a terrific speed, and was threatening every moment to capsize us. There was no time to lose, the sails had to be lowered immediately. Our boat was writhing in convulsions. A few icebergs we knew were on either side of us, but fortunately the channel was open directly to the north. But would it remain so? In front of us, girding the horizon from left to right, was a vaporish fog or mist, black as Egyptian night at the water's edge, and white like a steam cloud toward the top, which was finally lost to view as it blended with the great white flakes of falling snow. Whether it covered a treacherous iceberg, or some other hidden obstacle against which our little sloop would dash and send us to a watery grave, or was merely the phenomenon of an Arctic fog, there was no way to determine. On the page 284 of his works, Hall writes from the top of Providenceberg, a dark fog was seen to the north, indicating water. At 10 a.m. 3 of the men Kruger, Ninderman and Hobby went to Cape Upton to ascertain, if possible, the extent of the open water. On their return they reported several open spaces and much young ice, not more than a day old, so thin that it was easily broken, by throwing pieces of ice upon it. By what miracle we escaped being dashed to utter destruction, I do not know. I remember our little craft creaked and groaned, as if its joints were breaking. It rocked and staggered to and fro, as if clutched by some fierce undertow of whirlpool or maelstrom. Fortunately our compass had been fastened with long screws to a cross-beam. Most of our provisions, however, were tumbled out, and swept away from the deck of the cuddy, and had we not taken the precaution at the very beginning, to tie ourselves firmly to the masts of the sloop, we should have been swept into the lashing sea. Above the deafening tumult of the raging waves, I heard my father's voice. "Be courageous, my son," he shouted. "Odin is the god of the waters, the companion of the brave, and he is with us. Fear not." To me it seemed there was no possibility of our escaping a horrible death. The little sloop was shipping water, the snow was falling so fast as to be blinding, and the waves were tumbling over our counters in reckless widespread fury. There was no telling what instant we should be dashed against some drifting ice pack. The tremendous swells would heave us up to the very peaks of mountainous waves, then plunge us down into the depths of the sea's trough, as if our fishing sloop were a fragile shell. Gigantic white-capped waves, like veritable walls, fenced us in, fore and aft. This terrible nerve-wracking ordeal, with its nameless horrors of suspense and agony of fear indescribable, continued for more than 3 hours, and all the time we were being driven forward at fierce speed. Then suddenly, as if growing weary of its frantic exertions, the wind began to lessen its fury, and by degrees to die down. At last we were in perfect calm. The fog mist had also disappeared, and before us lay an iceless channel perhaps 10 or 15 miles wide with a few icebergs far away to our right, and an intermittent archipelago of smaller ones to the left. I watched my father closely, determined to remain silent until he spoke. Presently he untied a rope from his waist, and, without saying a word, began working the pumps, which fortunately were not damaged, relieving the sloop of the water it had shipped in the madness of the storm. He put up the sloop's sails as calmly, as if casting a fishing net, and then remarked that we were ready for a favoring wind when it came. His courage and persistence were truly remarkable. On investigation we found less than 1/3 of our provisions remaining, while to our utter dismay, we discovered that our water casks had been swept overboard during the violent plungings of our boat. 2 of our water casks were in the main hold, both were empty. We had a fair supply of food, but no fresh water. I realized at once the awfulness of our position. Presently I was seized with a consuming thirst. "It is indeed bad," remarked my father. "However, let us dry our bedraggled clothing, for we're soaked to the skin. Trust to the God Odin, my son. Do not give up hope." The sun was beating down slantingly, as if we were in southern latitude, instead of in the far northland. It was swinging around, its orbit ever visible, and rising higher and higher each day, frequently mist-covered, yet always peering through the lassowork of clouds like some fretful eye of fate, guarding the mysterious northland and jealously watching the pranks of man. Far to our right the raised decking the prisms of icebergs were gorgeous. Their reflections emitted flashes of garnet, of diamond, of sapphire. A pyrotechnic panorama of countless colors and shapes, while below could be seen the green-tinted sea, and above, the purple sky. Part 2 I tried to forget my thirst, by busying myself with bringing up some food and an empty vessel from the hold. Reaching over the side rail, I filled the vessel with water for the purpose of laving my hands and face. To my astonishment, when the water came in contact with my lips, I could taste no salt. I was startled by the discovery. "Father!" I fairly gasped, the water, it is fresh." "What, Olaf!" exclaimed my father, glancing hastily around. "Surely you are mistaken. There is no land. You are going mad." "But taste it," I cried. And thus we made the discovery that the water was indeed fresh, absolutely so, without the least briny taste or even the suspicion of a salty flavor. We forthwith filled our 2 remaining water casks, and my father declared it was a heavenly dispensation of mercy from the gods Odin and Thor. We were almost beside ourselves with joy, but hunger bade us end our enforced fast. Now that we had found fresh water in the open sea, what might we not expect in this strange latitude, where ship had never before sailed, and the splash of an oar had never been heard? In Volpoint I, page 196, Nansen writes it is a peculiar phenomenon, this dead water. We had at present a better opportunity of studying it than we desired. It occurs where a surface layer of fresh water rests upon the salt water of the sea, and this fresh water is carried along with the ship gliding on the heavier sea beneath it, as if on a fixed foundation. The difference between 2 strata was in this case so great that, while we had drinking water on the surface, the water we got from the bottom cock of the engine room was far too salt to be used for the boiler. We had scarcely appeased our hunger, when a breeze began filling the idle sails, and, glancing at the compass, we found the northern point pressing hard against the glass. In response to my surprise, my father said, "I have heard of this before. It is what they call the dipping of the needle." We loosened the compass, and turned it at right angles with the surface of the sea before its point would free itself from the glass and point according to unmolested attraction. It shifted uneasily, and seemed as unsteady as a drunken man, but finally pointed a course. Before this we thought the wind was carrying us north by northwest, but, with the needle free, we discovered, if it could be relied upon, that we were sailing slightly north by northeast. Our course, however, was ever tending northward. In Volume 2, pages 18 and 19, Nansen writes about the inclination of the needle. Speaking of Johnson, his aide one day, it was November 24, he came into supper a little after 6 o'clock, quite alarmed, and said there has just been a singular inclination of the needle in 24 degrees. And remarkably enough, its northern extremity pointed to the east. We again find in Peary's First Voyage, page 67, the following: "It had been observed that from the moment they had entered Lancaster Sound, the motion of the compass needle was very sluggish, and both this and its deviation increased as they progressed to the westward, and continued to do so in descending this inlet. Having reached latitude 73 degrees, they witnessed for the first time the curious phenomenon of the directive power of the needle becoming so weak as to be completely overcome by the attraction of the ship, so that the needle might now be said to point to the north pole of the ship. The sea was serenely smooth, with hardly a choppy wave, and the wind brisk and exhilarating. The sun's rays, while striking us aslant, furnished tranquil warmth. And thus time wore on day after day, and we found from the record in our logbook, we had been sailing 11 days, since the storm in the open sea. By strictest economy, our food was holding out fairly well, but beginning to run low. In the meantime, one of our casks of water had been exhausted, and my father said, "We will fill it again." But, to our dismay, we found the water was now as salt as in the region of the Lofoten Islands off the coast of Norway. This necessitated our being extremely careful of the remaining cask. I found myself wanting to sleep much of the time, whether it was the effect of the exciting experience of sailing in unknown waters, or the relaxation from the awful excitement incident to our adventure in a storm at sea, or due to want of food, I could not say. I frequently lay down on the bunker of our little sloop, and looked far up into the blue dome of the sky, and, notwithstanding the sun was shining far away in the east, I always saw a single star overhead. For several days, when I looked for this star, it was always there directly above us. It was now, according to our reckoning, about the 1st of August. The sun was high in the heavens, and was so bright, that I could no longer see the one lone star that attracted my attention a few days earlier. One day about this time, my father startled me, by calling my attention to a novel sight far in front of us, almost at the horizon. "It is a mock sun," exclaimed my father. "I have read of them. It is called a reflection or mirage. It will soon pass away." But this dull red false sun, as we supposed it to be, did not pass away for several hours, and while we were unconscious of its emitting any rays of light, still there was no time thereafter, when we could not sweep the horizon, and locate the illumination of the so-called false sun, during a period of at least 12 hours out of every 24. Clouds and mists would at times almost, but never entirely, hide its location. Gradually it seemed to climb higher in the horizon of the uncertain purply sky as we advanced. It could hardly be said to resemble the sun, except in its circular shape, and when not obscured by clouds or the ocean mists, it had a hazy red-bronzed appearance, which would change to a white like a luminous cloud, as if reflecting some greater light beyond. We finally agreed in our discussion of this smoky